Welcome, I'm Locke Meredith with Legal Lines. I'm very pleased to have on the show three different folks today. We're going to talk to Lipinski, he's a rehabilitation expert. We're going to talk to Greg Ellis, he's an economic expert. We're going to talk to Bill Mitchell, he's an attorney who works with me. And we're going to talk about the roles of experts and how they help a jury or judge make a decision in a trial. So that's next on Legal Lines. I'll see you there. Welcome to Legal Lines. I'm Locke Meredith. I thought we'd talk with various experts today and kind of give you an idea what it's like at a trial and what kind of evidence we present to a judge or jury. And so we're going to talk today to a rehabilitation expert, Mr. Lipinski. We're going to talk to an economic expert, Mr. Greg Ellis. And then we're going to talk to a jury consultant or a focus group consultant, and his name is Randy Hayden. First of all, we're going to talk to Mr. Lipinski. Lou, thanks for being on the show today.
Thanks for inviting me, Locke. Delighted to be here.
Tell us a little bit about your educational background.
Well, I've got an undergraduate degree from Bethany College in Bethany, West Virginia. I've got a master's degree from USL. I did some doctoral work at LSU.
And what is the master's in?
It's in psychology.
Okay. Now, you heard me discuss the fact that you're a rehabilitation expert. What in the world does that mean?
Well, what a rehab expert does, we study jobs and the requirements of jobs. We study people and the traits that people have. And we try to match the two together.
And the reason that's important to me as a trial attorney is because if I have an individual who's, let's say, horribly injured in a car wreck, say has a brain injury, we need to be able to determine what his earnings were in the past, what kind of jobs he was doing, and because of his physical injuries or limitations, what kind of jobs he can do in the future. And that's kind of where you come in.
Right.
What information do you look at to help us decide that?
I look at the medical records on the individual to see what type of injury he sustained, what kind of diagnosis the doctors have come up with.
Now, you're not a medical expert.
No, so that's why I have to rely on the doctors to tell me what has happened to this person. And I rely on them to tell me, as a result of these injuries, what are the limitations.
And the limitations we're talking about is physical limitations and or mental limitations.
Right. You mentioned a brain injury. From a brain injury, you might have physical limitations in terms of some paralysis or weakness, but you would also be likely to have some cognitive problems, some difficulty with processing information or difficulty with remembering
Just
things.
thinking.
Just tying your shoes.
Right.
Remembering how to do that.
So you look at the medical records of the treating physicians generally, and you see what treatment they provided, what injuries they say the individual has suffered, the victim has suffered, and then you also do what? What other information do you look at?
Well, I talk to the individual to get them to tell me how they're feeling, to get them to tell me what they think is wrong. I do some testing with them to see how they do math, how well do they read, how well could they put together a puzzle. And I do some testing for motor skills to see how quickly they can move their fingers, how quickly they can put things together.
So as I understand it, before the testing, you get kind of a history from the patient or the victim.
What I get is I get their educational history, get some social history, and I get their work history.
All right, let's talk about the social history. What do you care about there?
How old they are, where they were born, where do they live, where did they go to school.
What about educational history?
Well, how far along in school did they go?
Now, why is that important?
Well, it depends on if somebody left school in the 6th grade, that's going to be a limiting factor. Someone with a high school education or college education, the more education you have, the better access you have, more jobs that you have access to, and the more money you can make.
Okay. So you determine their educational level, and then I guess you look at previous jobs they've held before the collision or the incident where they're injured. Looking
at the previous jobs, it gives me one thing that nobody else has. What I get from the previous jobs is what's called in scientific terms what would be a baseline measure. That I get a measure that tells me what this person was like before they got hurt. Because if they did a series of jobs and I know what the requirements are of those jobs, then I know that they had the skills it took to do those. So I basically have an x-ray of what the person looked like before they broke their arm. Okay, and so in essence, you're looking at their educational background, their past performance, in essence, based on their limitations that they may have had via education or any other, and you say, okay, this is what we know they were doing, and this is basically what they were earning.
Now what do you do with this information? You talked about the testing. You test them to determine basically how well they're processing information, what kind of verbal skills they have, mathematical skills, any specialized skills, motor skills, or kind of physical skills. You got all this information. What do you do with it then?
What I can do then is a comparison, because I've got the baseline measure. I've got the work history that tells me what they could do and what their skill levels were before they got hurt. And then I've got the test data that tells me what their skill levels are and what they can do after they've been hurt. Then I can put together a profile from before the injury and a profile from after the injury. I can compare those two profiles and I can see if anything has changed.
So what you're basically doing is comparing past performance with what you would anticipate to be future performance given the physical limitations or mental limitations that you've identified via the medical records and your own testing.
Well, I'm in fact looking at not what I anticipate, but what they actually do. What do they do on the day that I test them? That tells me what they can do now.
It's objective, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
All right, so customarily you will give an opinion in trial before a judge or jury. And what you're doing is you use a lot of statistics. Explain that to me.
Well, what I do as an expert in vocational rehab, I don't walk into the courtroom and tell a story. I don't walk into the courtroom and tell a story based on my years of experience. What I do is each time out I conduct a scientific experiment. I have a theoretical basis for doing it. The theoretical basis is the harder a job is, the more it pays. And so what I look at is your work history, and what does that tell me? How difficult were the jobs that you did? How much did they pay? Based on what you can do now, how difficult of a job could you do, and what does that pay? So what I'm looking at is, from a statistical point of view, given your profile of worker traits, what can I match you up with in the publications from the Department of Labor in terms of what your job's skills are and what jobs you might be able to do. So
the federal government has information that you have access to that you can say, look, I know this is what the guy did in the past, and here's his education, and here's his skill level, and here's where he was statistically amongst all the folks with those kind of factors. What kind of job was he earning? Was he doing well? Was he way up there at the top making really good money for that kind of skill in education? And then you're also able to, using statistics and given the now limitations that he has because of an injury, use those statistics to decide whether or not he can do that kind of job, and if he can't, what kind of job, transferable skills does he have to another type of job?
Exactly. And now all that comes from the Department of Labor, from the Dictionary of Occupational Titles. And the Department of Labor has been collecting information about jobs and job requirements since the doughboys came back from World War I. In World War I, that was the first time that they had tested a large population of people. So the Army knew what the capabilities were for the people that they had drafted. When these guys came back from the war, they knew what their skills were. But nobody had ever gone into the work environment, gone into mechanic shops or gone into secretarial pools.
And so that's what the federal government did.
Right. They went in and they tested the skills needed to do those jobs.
Right.
So if you know what skills a person has and you know what skills are required of a job, then you can match them up, or you can decide this person can do this job, but they can't do this one.
So bottom line is you're testifying to help the judge and jury make a decision.
Exactly.
Okay. Thank you very much for being on the show, Lou.
My pleasure.
This is Locke Meredith with Legal Lines. We'll be right back, and we'll next be speaking with another expert that we use in trials.